If you remember when the original Gladiator event came out, you are an OG TDS player. I still remember playing it when it dropped, and it was a pretty big challenge at the time. Albeit, I got carried through it. It was just fun to use the tower on the original Rocket Arena map, though. If you remember the old tower faces, you are an OG TDS player. While these technically were removed in 2022, they've been around since day one, and it has a lot of personality, surprisingly. I do think the newer tower faces are better though, as they give a lot more personality and style to the towers. If you remember some of the old maps and map badges, you are an OG TDS player. This one really sticks out to me, especially the ROBLOX map along with this train map here. You used to get badges for beating every single map, and I honestly kind of miss this. I don't know why they took it out. If you remember when TDS looked like this instead of this, you are an OG TDS player. This classic ROBLOX style looked pretty good for the time, and it's cool to see that it was brought back with one of the community maps, but it definitely looks a little bit dated now. If you remember stacking towers, you're definitely an OG TDS player. This was one of my favorite features you could do in TDS, simply because of the way maps were designed. It was hard to fit all of the towers on the cliffs and on the ground. This is a forgotten feature of modern TDS because of the way the placement system works, but I get really nostalgic over this one thing for some reason. If you remember the older tower designs, you are an OG TDS player. Do you remember when every tower was nearly... Do you remember when If you remember the older tower designs, you are an OG TDS player. Do you remember when nearly every tower was bald? That was quite boring, not gonna lie. If you remember game modes taking nearly an hour to beat, you are an OG TDS player. I remember when Golden Mode and Old Fallen Mode both nearly took an hour to beat because of how lengthy the waves were. If you remember certain unique attributes skins had, you are an OG TDS player. What I mean by this is skins like Wraith the Minigunner had completely unique designs. Like instead of wielding a minigun, it wielded a P90? I think that's a gun type. I don't know exactly. If you remember Golden Mode, then you are an OG TDS player. Although Golden Mode is lived on through Intermediate, it's still a cool piece of TDS history. It featured a lot of unique enemies that were immune to debuffs and splash damage. If you remember the old boss shields, you are an OG TDS player. These are possibly one of the most unbalanced things that were added back in the day. It made lots of towers like Ranger extremely weak, bottlenecking their max damage output to only deal 1 to 5 damage instead of however much it had at the time. I really don't remember the stats, it's been too long. Those are 10 things I could think of, but I also did a poll in my server asking some of my older TDS fans what they miss about old TDS. Spell Vantim says, the fact that events had a easy mode and a hard mode. This one is actually pretty fair. I remember specifically with the Easter event from 2020, they offered an easy mode which gave you the egg reward from the ROBLOX event, and the hard mode which gave the Swarmer Tower. A common opinion people had was that they missed Mega Mode, which I think is agreeable. It was fun playing with big servers, although I think the meta is way too unbalanced right now and strong for this to be fair. Broko, or Witherstar, which is one of the best TDS players right out there, he says, I missed when game modes had these little medal badges in the lobby. And you used to get, it's like it was cool to show off how many maps you've beaten with all these medals, and this is another common opinion shared by people. Finally, I decided to ask a couple of your favorite content creators and a TDS admin about their opinions. Corso says, I miss mega servers and the old charm of TDS with its old style. This one is another common opinion, and I already covered it, but it's fairly agreeable. Dollars had a pretty lengthy response, so I'll sum it up with just saying, I joined TDS during the 2020 Egg Hunt, and I thought some specific features like the Platinum Crates were cool, and old distinct skin designs like Neon Ray DJ and Partisan Ranger were my favorites. Outside of that though, the game was pretty back then. I have good memories of it because of nostalgia, but it was objectively way worse than current TDS. And lastly, a response from TDS's head admins. Just to sum it up, he says that he thinks old events were better, and how modern events are often overpromised and underdelivered. Personally, I've been a player since Sword Fights on the Heights, and I wanted to give my own opinion here. For me, I miss when TDS wasn't so oversaturated. And what I mean is the game has been the same for so long. It's good to see game modes finally changing and more towers getting reworked, but TDS at its core has been the same game for a very, very long time when it comes down to the gameplay formula. If you've been a fan of me for a while, I made so many hardcore videos simply because I found the game a lot more enjoyable because of the difficulty from hardcore. I didn't really like the older Fallen game mode because it's simply way too easy to play TDS right now. It's not like TDX where you have to strategically plan out your tower spots and placements. You have to plan out your paths on the towers themselves. But this is just a personal opinion. Anyways, comment below what you missed about TDS, and don't forget to like and subscribe. That'd be very nice and cool.